Few places in the world can match the weight of history Jerusalem carries. It isn't just old, it's ancient, sacred, and deeply contested. With roots reaching back nearly 5,000 years, Jerusalem has stood at the center of dreams, prayers, wars, and empires. Three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, consider it holy. And that shared reverence has often brought not unity, but conflict. But how did it all begin? How did a small settlement near a natural spring rise to become one of the most desired, fought over, and symbolic cities on Earth? Let's travel back in time to where it all started. The story of Jerusalem starts humbly. Around 3000 BC, early settlers gathered near a natural spring known as Gihon. In a mostly dry and rocky region, water was life. This spring made survival possible, and soon a small community began to grow around it. These early people weren't building temples or dreaming of holy lands. They were just trying to live, farming, herding animals, and using the fresh spring water to sustain their families. But unknowingly, they had planted the seeds of a city that would shape the spiritual journey of billions. By 2000 BC, the settlement had grown into something more. It had walls. The people living there were known as Canaanites, and they built a thick stone wall to protect their precious water source. They named the city something close to Rushalimum, or Urusalim, an early form of Jerusalem. It roughly meant foundation of peace. Ironically, that peace would be tested again and again. At the time, Jerusalem lay on the edges of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom. Though not directly ruled by the Egyptians, it was close enough to appear in their records. That's our first written mention of the city. By 1500 BC, the Egyptian New Kingdom had expanded and took control of Jerusalem. They didn't rule it directly like a capital city, but made it part of a larger system of vassal states stretching from North Africa through the Levant. But even empires fall. Around the 12th century BC, a mysterious wave of destruction swept across the region. Cities were burned, kingdoms vanished, and trade collapsed. This period, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, left a power vacuum across the Middle East. From this chaos, new groups began to rise, including a people who would leave a mark unlike any other, the Israelites. According to Jewish tradition, a leader named David united the Israelite tribes and conquered Jerusalem around 1000 BC. He chose it as the capital of a new kingdom, one that would be remembered in holy texts and echoed in prayers for thousands of years. David didn't just choose Jerusalem for its water. Its location was politically smart. It sat on the border between northern and southern tribes, helping unify his people. The small hilltop city began to grow in importance. Then came Solomon, David's son. Around 960 BC, he built a magnificent temple, the first temple. It stood on a platform that many believe is today's Temple Mount. This wasn't just a building, it was a declaration that Jerusalem wasn't just a capital, it was the center of the Jewish faith. But golden ages don't last forever. After Solomon's death, the kingdom split in two. The northern part remained Israel, and the southern part, where Jerusalem sat, became known as Judah. Jerusalem stayed the capital of Judah, and the temple remained its spiritual heart. But the city wasn't safe. Over the next few centuries, stronger neighbors, the Assyrians and Egyptians, kept attacking or threatening the area. Jerusalem was still standing, but storm clouds were gathering. In the 6th century BC, the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II, set its sights on Jerusalem. He wanted to control all the land between the rivers and the sea, and Jerusalem was in the way. In 597 BC, the Babylonians attacked. They took the city, installed a puppet ruler, and exiled many of Jerusalem's leaders and elites. But the city didn't stay quiet for long. 10 years later, a rebellion broke out. Nebuchadnezzar returned, and this time, he made sure no one would forget his message. In 587 BC, Jerusalem was attacked again. The Babylonians destroyed the temple, tore down the city walls, and forced thousands more Jews into exile. It was a crushing blow. The holy city lay in ruins. Many thought the story of Jerusalem had ended there. In 539 BC, the mighty Babylonian Empire was itself conquered, this time by the Persians, under King Cyrus the Great. Cyrus had a very different approach to rule. Instead of crushing cultures, he allowed conquered peoples to return to their homes and rebuild. For the Jewish exiles, this was a miracle. Cyrus gave them permission to go back to Jerusalem and even helped fund the rebuilding of the temple. By 516 BC, the Second Temple was completed. The city was back on the map, not as an independent kingdom, but as a religious center once again. For the next 2 centuries, Jerusalem was under Persian rule. But peace didn't mean freedom. The Jews lived in their city, but they didn't control it. In 332 BC, the world changed again. A young Macedonian general named Alexander the Great swept through the Middle East, defeating the Persian Empire and taking Jerusalem with it. After Alexander's sudden death, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Jerusalem came under the rule of the Ptolemies in Egypt, and later the Seleucids in Syria. Under Greek influence, many Jews adopted Hellenistic culture, new ways of speaking, dressing, and thinking. But not everyone agreed with this change. Tensions grew. In the 1600s BC, a Greek ruler named Antiochus IV tried to ban Jewish practices and even desecrated the temple. That was the final straw. A Jewish rebel group, the Maccabees, rose up and took back Jerusalem. In 164 BC, they rededicated the temple, an event still celebrated today as Hanukkah. After the Maccabean revolt, the Jews ruled themselves again. The Hasmonean dynasty created an independent Jewish kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital. For about a century, they had freedom. But nothing lasts forever in Jerusalem. In 63 BC, Roman general Pompey entered Jerusalem. By 37 BC, Herod the Great, a Roman client king, was ruling the city. He expanded and beautified Jerusalem, turning the Second Temple into a massive, magnificent complex. But it was still Roman land. After Herod's death, tensions between the Jewish population and their Roman overlords grew. By the time of Jesus of Nazareth, born in nearby Bethlehem, Jerusalem was a city full of political unrest and spiritual hope. Jesus preached, healed, and taught in and around Jerusalem. His final days, his arrest, trial, crucifixion, and, as believed by Christians, his resurrection, all happened in the city. His followers, the apostles, stayed in Jerusalem and began spreading his teachings. Christianity was born here, in the shadow of the temple and Roman authority. But the Roman Empire wasn't welcoming to either Jews or early Christians. In 66 CE, years of frustration exploded into violence. The Jewish population rebelled against Roman rule, starting what became known as the First Jewish-Roman War. Jerusalem became the center of the fight. In 70 CE, after a brutal siege, the Romans broke through. They destroyed the city and burned down the Second Temple, leaving only one wall standing. That wall, now called the Western Wall or Wailing Wall, still stands today. It is one of the holiest places in Judaism, a symbol of both loss and resilience. After the revolt, the Romans built a new city on the ruins of Jerusalem. They called it Aelia Capitolina. Jews were banned from living there except for one day each year to mourn at the wall. In 132 CE, another Jewish revolt broke out, the Bar Kokhba revolt. It was crushed just as brutally. Roman Emperor Hadrian turned Jerusalem into a thoroughly Roman city, even building a temple to Jupiter on the site of the destroyed Jewish temple. For nearly 2 centuries, Jerusalem was no longer Jewish, but it was about to take on a new identity. In the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire changed. Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and so did much of the empire. Constantine sent his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem. She identified key Christian holy sites, including what she believed to be the place of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. A grand church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was built there in 335 CE. Jerusalem was now a Christian city. For the next 300 years, under the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, Jerusalem grew as a center of Christian faith. Pilgrims came from across the empire to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. But history never stands still in Jerusalem. By the early 600s, far to the south in Arabia, a new religious movement was taking shape. A man named Muhammad began preaching a message of monotheism, community, and submission to God. After his death in 632 CE, Muslim armies began expanding rapidly. In 638, Jerusalem fell to the forces of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. But instead of destruction, Umar offered peace. He allowed Christians and Jews to continue practicing their faiths. Jews, who had been banned from the city for centuries, were allowed to return. Islam brought not just new rulers, but new meaning to Jerusalem. In the late 600s, a remarkable building was constructed on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock. Soon after, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built nearby. To Muslims, Jerusalem became the 3rd holiest city in Islam, after Mecca and Medina. It was believed to be the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the miraculous night journey. Now, Jerusalem held deep spiritual meaning for all 3 Abrahamic faiths, and that made it more sacred, but also more complicated. After 300 years under Byzantine, Eastern Roman influence, Jerusalem was ruled by emperors who had declared Christianity the empire's official religion. It was a sacred city for Christians, but other faiths lived in its shadow. Then a new faith surged across Arabia. Muhammad's followers, energized by a vision of one God, swept north after his death in 632 CE. In 638 CE, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab entered Jerusalem in a moment of respect. According to tradition, he humbly offered a prayer on the Temple Mount, declined to pray inside so as not to sanctify the site for future Islamic worship, and later set up a symbolic mosque nearby. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, 661 to 750 CE, Jerusalem was given a central role. The Dome of the Rock was built in 691 CE. Its gold dome and octagonal structure crowned the Temple Mount, marking the hill as a sacred place for Muslims. Soon after, the Al-Aqsa Mosque followed. Jerusalem now held a 3rd spiritual crown for worshippers of the Book: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Under Muslim leaders, Christians and Jews were recognized as people of the Book. They were allowed to worship openly, pay a tax, and practice their religions, though under a second-tier status known as dhimmi. On the surface, this felt like coexistence. In reality, it was a fragile balance built atop shifting sands. By the late 10th century, power shifted to the Fatimid Caliphate, centered in North Africa. They ruled Jerusalem from 969 CE, and their line remained in control until 1073. At first, their treatment of the city was much like their predecessors. Christians and Jews lived with restrictions, but continued in their traditions. But things changed. In 1009 CE, Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the central site for the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. The act shocked Christendom. Pilgrims were horrified. Christians were angry. In reaction, European kings and the Byzantine Empire began to see Jerusalem as vulnerable and worth rescuing. By 1173, Jerusalem fell to the Seljuk Turks, Muslims from Central Asia, and the pilgrims faced increasing difficulty making the dangerous journey to the city. Rumors spread that they were attacked or even killed. At this moment, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I faced Turkish incursions that threatened his realm. Pope Urban II answered his plea by taking a bold step. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, he called for a crusade, a holy mission to reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom. Thousands of knights and peasants from across Europe rallied to the banner. Some sought religious salvation, others hoped for land, loot, or a fresh start. Whatever their motives, they were united in faith, fervor, and the promise of remission of sins. The journey was brutal. Many died to hunger, disease, and attack even before reaching the Holy Land. But in June 1099, a ragged army of Crusaders breached Jerusalem's walls. What followed was a massacre. Muslims and Jews who remained in the city were slaughtered. Churches were looted. The city was resettled by European Christians who set up the Kingdom of Jerusalem. For nearly a century, Jerusalem was a Christian state. Churches were repaired. A Western-style Church of the Holy Sepulchre rose again. Priestly orders like the Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller arrived to guard pilgrims, tending to the wounded and protecting travelers. But this new kingdom existed under constant pressure. Muslim powers, including the Seljuks and later Egypt's Ayyubids, did not forget the fall of 1099. In 1174 CE, a Kurdish general named Saladin became Sultan of Egypt and Syria. He was known for piety, military skill, and justice. He united Muslim forces across the region. In 1187 CE, Saladin led his army north into Sinai and Palestine. He crushed the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin, near Tiberias. The Christian king and his knights were defeated, and Jerusalem's defenses lay in ruins. On October 2nd, 1187, Saladin entered Jerusalem, but he chose restraint. Though vengeance would have been justified, he ordered for humane treatment. Christian soldiers were allowed to leave with ransom, clergy could stay, and Jewish residents returned. Saladin's respect towards the city honored its religious significance, not only for Muslims, but for Christians and Jews. Jerusalem's loss sparked outrage in Europe. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, was led by legends. King Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, Frederick Barbarossa, even the Holy Roman Emperor. They recaptured coastal strongholds, but not Jerusalem. Instead, they sealed a treaty with Saladin. Christian pilgrims could visit the Holy City freely, even if political control remained Muslim. For the next century, Jerusalem changed hands, or terms, again and again. Damaged walls were torn down to prevent future siege. Smaller Crusader kingdoms rose and fell. Muslim forces reclaimed lands. But those walls, once the symbol of the city's invincibility, were largely gone. By 1291, With the fall of Acre, the Crusader presence collapsed. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim rule until the 20th century. After the Ayyubids, the Mamluks took power in Egypt and Syria. Originally military slaves, they seized control in 1250. Jerusalem under the Mamluks was not a capital, but it mattered. Mamluk rulers invested in repairing mosques, synagogues, churches. They built schools, widened roads for pilgrims, and revived commerce during religious festivals. They allowed Christian pilgrims but imposed travel fees and restrictions. Jews, previously banned or reduced during Crusader rule, regained presence, though they remained a small group. Over 300 years, Mamluks maintained the city's religious vigor without innovating politically. Walls remained low. Jerusalem was peaceful, yet stagnant. In 1516, the Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Selim I, took Syria and Palestine from the Mamluks. For the next 400 years, Jerusalem was part of an empire stretching from Hungary to the Arabian Peninsula. Early on, Jerusalem was a provincial backwater. But in the mid-16th century, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent changed that. He rebuilt the city walls, thick, massive fortifications that still stand today. He restored the city's grandeur, commissioned mosques, and invited new tribes of Jews from North Africa and Ottoman territories. Jerusalem's quarters, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Armenian, took shape during this period. Communities lived in their own areas, worshipped in their own houses, but shared the same city walls. It was a delicate coexistence. During the next centuries, Jerusalem remained calm but marginalized. The Ottomans favored Damascus as their Syrian capital, leaving Jerusalem in relative isolation. Its population hovered in the thousands, unremarkable yet significant to pilgrims and scholars. The 1800s shook Jerusalem awake again. European powers, Britain, France, Russia, found new interests in the Holy Land. They funded churches, hospitals, and schools tied to their national churches and religious traditions. Pilgrims streamed in. In 1838, the city gained its first modern visitor, American explorer Edward Robinson. He documented ancient ruins and biblical geography. By the mid-century mark, Jerusalem was overcrowded. A community outside the walls called the Russian Compound emerged. Jewish neighborhoods bloomed beyond the walls, Mishkanot Sha'ananim, Nahalat Shiva. Land was purchased through funds like the Hebrew settlers' philanthropy of Sir Moses Montefiore and Judah Touro. Ottoman authorities experimented with reforms, improving sanitation, roads, schools. But political unrest simmered both within and beyond Jerusalem's walls. Zionist and Arab nationalist ideas began to emerge, although neither had yet brought open conflict. Despite Western investment, Jerusalem remained under Ottoman control until the twilight of World War I. Different communities existed in parallel. Jews continued to immigrate. Christians managed foreign-funded institutions, and Muslims remained the largest group. Each made their contributions to the city's urban fabric. But this fragile mosaic was starting to crack. Nationalism, Arab and Jewish, began claiming the same land. Political loyalties were shifting. The city's meaning was expanding, not shrinking. And soon, the Great War would forever reshape Jerusalem. From conquest to conquest, Jerusalem remained sacred and surprisingly durable. Walls crumbled and arches were built, mosques followed temples. People prayed, traded, and dreamt in different languages, under different banners. Yet each left a mark, each layer fed the next. By the time the British flag replaced the Ottoman on Jerusalem's walls in 1917, the city had been shaped by over a millennium of faith and power. It remained holy, contested, and fragile. Borders had shifted, but the spiritual gravity remained unchanged. Jerusalem has always stood at the intersection of time and faith. But in the 20th century, that intersection became a crossroads of world politics, nationalism, and deep human longing. What unfolded here, from 1917 through today, has shaped more than borders. It has shaped identities, dreams, and heartbreaks. It has tested humanity's ability to live together in a city sacred to billions. This is the story of a city again caught in the tides of change, of broken promises, fierce hope, and delicate futures. In December 1917, during World War I, British General Edmund Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot, not on horseback, to show reverence for the city's sacred nature. The Ottoman Empire had fallen, and Jerusalem was now under British military occupation. What followed was a period of political complexity. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, stating its support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But they had also promised Arab leaders independence for their support in the war. Both commitments carried different expectations, and both claimed Jerusalem as central. In 1920, the League of Nations granted Britain a formal mandate to administer Palestine. Jerusalem became its administrative and cultural hub. Jewish, Arab, and Christian communities grew in number as immigration and development accelerated. By the mid-1930s, Jews comprised about 1/3 of Jerusalem's population, with Muslims and Christians making up the rest. But peaceful growth gave way to tension. Jewish immigration, Arab land displacement, economic disparity, and conflicting promises fueled resentment. In the late 1920s and 1930s, riots broke out across Palestine, with Jerusalem often at the front lines. British authorities struggled to contain violence, prompting further restrictions on immigration, particularly Jewish, and deepening distrust on all sides. By 1947, Britain announced it would withdraw from Palestine and referred the problem to the United Nations. On November 29th, the UN General Assembly voted to partition British Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem held under international administration to protect holy sites and shared communities. The plan was accepted by Jewish leaders, but rejected by Arab leaders and surrounding Arab states. Fighting broke out immediately. Jerusalem became a battleground between Jewish and Arab militias, and the violence surrounding the Holy City became symbolic of the wider conflict. When British troops left in May 1948, the State of Israel was declared. Neighboring Arab countries invaded. The battle for Jerusalem intensified. Jewish forces fought for West Jerusalem, Arab forces for East Jerusalem, including the Old City. By the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, West Jerusalem was under Israeli control. East Jerusalem and the Old City, including the Temple Mount, came under Jordanian control. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were displaced, many from Jerusalem. The city was physically divided. A no-man's land stretched through neighborhoods, and borders were marked by barbed wire and guard towers. From 1949 until 1967, Jerusalem lived two separate lives. In the Israeli West, the city became part of a young nation's capital. Israel built government buildings, homes for immigrants, and cultural centers. Palestinians who had remained were under military rule, with limited rights. East Jerusalem became part of Jordan. The Old City was under Jordanian custodianship. Jews were barred from the Western Wall and Jewish holy sites. Jordan preserved and administered the holy places for Muslims and Christians, occasionally renovating ancient structures. Life went on. People lived near each other, but rarely together. And then, in June 1967, everything changed again. In June 1967, tensions between Israel and neighboring Arab states ignited. Israel launched a lightning preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Just 6 days later, Jerusalem was reunited by force. Israel captured East Jerusalem, the Old City, the Temple Mount, and even the Jewish Quarter, where synagogues had been destroyed in 1948. These areas had been under Jordanian control for 19 years. Many people celebrated reunification. Israelis praised the return of the Western Wall under Israeli control. But for Palestinians, the event marked the beginning of a painful new chapter: armed occupation, restricted rights, and house demolitions. In the years that followed, Israel expanded Jerusalem eastward, declaring it part of its United Al-Quds in legal terms, a move recognized by only a few nations and condemned by most of the world. Palestinians became residents of an occupied city, with limited access to education, work permits, building permits, and freedom of movement. Jerusalem soon became the epicenter of religious and political confrontation. The Western Wall became Israel's most potent spiritual symbol. Jewish prayer and pilgrimage there thrived, but the site's proximity to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest site, meant tensions often flared. Right-wing Jewish groups, nationalist settlers, and the government pushed for increased Jewish rights on the Temple Mount, prompting violent clashes with Palestinians and international condemnation. The Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan saw tensions rise with archaeological digs below Muslim homes and Jewish settler encroachment above. Checkpoints and fences divided Jewish and Palestinian areas. Acts of violence, attacks, demolitions, protests became tragically frequent. Over the decades, leaders tried to solve Jerusalem's status. In the Camp David Accords, 1978-79, peace between Israel and Egypt was achieved, but Jerusalem was not resolved. It stayed under Israeli control, but international involvement remained. The Oslo Accords, 1993-95, between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, created a process for resolving the conflict, including Jerusalem. However, the accords left Jerusalem's borders and governance undecided. In 2000, during peace talks at Camp David and later in Taba, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat came close to agreement, reportedly offering East Jerusalem to the Palestinians as their capital. Barak's proposal included a Palestinian state in Gaza and most of the West Bank, with shared or divided governance in the Old City. But divisions over control of the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount, Palestinian refugees, and shared sovereignty scuttled the deal. The Second Intifada, 2000 to 2005, followed, a period of Palestinian uprising and Israeli military response, leading to thousands of deaths and deepening mistrust, especially around Jerusalem and its holy sites. In response to waves of terror attacks, Israel built a barrier, sometimes wall, other times fence, along and within East Jerusalem neighborhoods. The barrier cut communities off from each other, restricted Palestinian movement, and changed daily life for thousands. Settlement building in East Jerusalem continued. Jewish settler population grew, often in places seen by Palestinians as illegal under international law, though Israel considered them neighborhoods. Palestinians, meanwhile, faced housing shortages, home demolitions, and difficulty obtaining building permits. Demographically, Jerusalem shifted. By 2025, it is estimated that approximately 63% of inhabitants are Israeli Jews and about 37% are Palestinian, Muslims, and Christians. those statistics are contested. Palestinian residents face higher poverty, fewer services, and limited access to municipal resources. Jerusalem remains a political flashpoint. Most nations do not recognize Israel's claim to all of the city. They locate their embassies in Tel Aviv, pending a final status agreement. However, in 2017, the United States officially recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and relocated its embassy there in 2018, a move that brought international protest and Palestinian clashes. Yet diplomacy continues. In 2020, Israel signed normalization agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, the Abrahamic Accords. In these new alignments, some Arab states recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital in practice, but stopped short of endorsing Israeli sovereignty over the entire city or replacing Palestinian claims. In the face of hardship, faith sustains people. Mosques, churches, synagogues, and shared spaces still host prayers and festivals. Cultural events bring Israelis and Palestinians together. Young people collaborate online and in person, creating art, startups, and ideas. Jerusalem has a stubborn resilience. It carries scars, but it also carries hope. It invites people to pray, but also to dialogue. It remains contested, but also believed in by Jews, Muslims, Christians, and seekers of all kinds.